Good evening. I see some people are paying attention. Thank you very much. What table are you? Thank you, table 2. Thank you, table 2. Hi, I'm Kelly Falcone Hall. I'm President and CEO of Western Reserve Historical Society. Thank you very much. I see some of you still grabbing your seat. That's fine. Welcome. Welcome to the Western Reserve Historical Society and to the 100-Year Club of the Western Reserve Annual Induction Ceremony and Dinner. Isn't it nice to have you all here this evening? Good to see you. I will tell you, for those of us who are unable to attend the event in person tonight, a full recording of the full program will be available. That includes our fabulous keynote speaker, Carrie Jaros, the president and CEO of Gojo Industries, the full induction ceremony. All of this will be available online for anyone who was not able to come tonight. So as many of you know, the 100-Year Club recognizes Northeast Ohio companies and organizations that have been in continuous existence for 100 years or more. Proceeds from this event support our Youth Entrepreneurship Education Program that is presented in close partnership with Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And that is done thanks to the extremely generous leadership support from the Burton D. Morgan Foundation. I would like to recognize Deb Hoover, who is the president and CEO of the Burton D. Morgan Foundation. She was not able to be with us this evening. She's been with the foundation since 2007 and has been an incredible partner and friend and guide to the Historical Society since we started this program in 2008. I also want to thank Emily Bean, who is our program officer with the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, for working with us over the last 18 to 24 months for her partnership, her support, and her guidance. It's been very meaningful. And I will again say, after nearly 2 years of disruption to operations and to our way of life, it is really wonderful to see everyone back. I would say everyone in this room really embodies the spirit of this event. We are entrepreneurial, we're resilient, we're innovative, we are still here, and we are thriving. Western Reserve Historical Society is strong. Our financial position is very strong as we head into our 155th year. We're building our team, we're growing in new directions, and we're creating opportunities to access for people to access our shared past in ways that we had really never imagined. So I am grateful to our team, to our staff, to our board. Many of you are here this evening, and to all of you. I want to say a few words about our Youth Entrepreneurship Education Program. Again, over the last 2 years, because of the pandemic's impact on in-person learning in schools has really been devastating, as you all know. Our Ye4CLE team very swiftly adapted our curriculum to a virtual format, allowing students and teachers to continue their entrepreneurship education. And I want to recognize the entire Ye4CLE team for your achievements, and I know that many of you are here with us tonight. India Jones, who is our Youth Entrepreneurship Education Program Manager. India, are you here? Is she not here? Okay, wherever you are, India, thank you. Gail Gaddison is a social studies content manager for Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Dr. Mary Manning is our pre-K through 12 education coordinator and youth entrepreneurship education project director. She's also the coordinator for Region 3 Ohio History Day. Joe Sconce and Shannon Stewart are program managers at Hale Farm and Village. Angie Lowry is the director of the Cleveland History Center. Travis Henline, who is the director of Hale Farm and Village, and again, Emily Bean, who is our dedicated program officer with Burton D. Morgan Foundation. Please help me recognize the Ye4CLE team. I promised I would be brief. Before I close, I would like to thank Carrie Jaros in advance for this evening's keynote. I want to thank Alex Chapman. Thank you. Kai Lee, who is not able to be with us this evening, for your leadership of this event. Really appreciate it, and great to see you. Our advancement team, Glenn Anderson, Christy Gound, Stacy Rusher, Chandel Smith, and Robin Marks. Thank you so much for making this year's event a success. And I am extremely grateful to all of our event sponsors, to our board of directors, to the staff for your continuing hard work, innovation, and your vision. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Peter Kelly. Peter is chair of the Western Reserve Historical Society Board of Directors and is a mentor sponsor of this event. Thank you, Peter. Peter is a retired partner with PwC. He joined our board of directors, we believe, in 2016. Carolyn can help us with that. Peter was elected chair July 1st, 2020. You know, like nothing was going on at that point in time. And he's really done an exemplary job leading Western Reserve Historical Society, especially during these unusual times. I am grateful to you for that. He is a champion for youth entrepreneurship education, and I think without further ado, I will welcome Peter to the podium. Thank you. Enjoy the evening.
Kelly, thank you very much for that and for your opening remarks. I have to say it's great to be here and look out and see so many people. And the great thing is if we're actively eating and drinking, I actually get to see you. So keep actively eating and drinking. So first of all, I'm very proud to say thank you on behalf of the full board of directors. Your support, your being here, not just tonight, but throughout the year and supporting youth education is really very important to us, and I think it makes a real difference in terms of the education and the opportunities and the inspiration for our young people who really are the future of Northeast Ohio. So thank you very much for your support and your active participation in that. Throughout the evening, you'll see some of the sponsors scrolling through on the board behind me. You'll see them in your program booklet. So thank you very much to all the sponsors who have provided your financial support to this. It's super important and we're very grateful for that. I have to thank Kelly and all of her staff. They always work hard. They represent the community. They represent what Western Reserve Historical Society, but the last 20 months, coming up on 2 years, has been, super challenging, and I think they've just done an outstanding job, and I really want to say thank you to all of the staff for your contributions during that time. Congratulations, of course, to our recipients tonight. It's really amazing when you stop and think about the fact that all of the organizations that are being represented here this evening have been in continuous operation for 100 or more years. And that is just an amazing accomplishment when you think about really the statistics about the number of corporations, companies, partnerships, et cetera, that don't last 1 year. And so to go through all of the changes and stay relevant and make a difference in the lives that you've impacted over those years is really fascinating. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you for being here. I will move on to the important thing, which is to recognize all those organizations. And to do that, the chief historian at the Western Reserve Historical Society is John Gabrowski. And John is going to be our MC for this evening and will share his knowledge and anecdotes along the way. So John, thank you very much and welcome to the stage.
I have just been delayed by dinner. You'll be happy to know that. And so I'll be back up on the podium in 20 minutes as your dinners are served. So I'm the last person in the world who would like to keep you away from dinner. You'll just get more historical lecture afterwards. Thank you. Okay, everybody, I'm back. I've come on during the entree all the time. So we would like to keep things on schedule. That's going to depend on how loquacious I get today. But this is a history class of sorts. There are no tests afterwards unless you really want one. And what I'm here to do is to introduce the 12 organizations that are going to be inducted into the 100-Year Club of Cleveland this evening. Let me give you a little bit of introduction about the 100-Year Club of Cleveland, and Kelly touched on that briefly. It actually dates to 1953, and it was founded by two people, Curtis Lee Smith, who was the head of the Chamber of Commerce at that time, and William Ganson Rose, a publicist who wrote a massive history of Cleveland. And I promise I'm not going to do a massive history for you tonight. For many years, it was hosted in the 1970s and 1980s at the Historical Society. And then in the 1990s, for some reason, the club went moribund. And it was rejuvenated, if you will, by the Muldoon Center for Entrepreneurship at John Carroll University. So we owe a debt to John Carroll, and we began cooperating with John Carroll. And it came fully over to WRHS in 2012. So we're delighted to have it back here. It really fits very neatly into what this institution does. So that's the bit of that history about why you're here. What I'd like to do before I get into the first introduction is to give you a little sense of what Northeastern Ohio and Cleveland was like 100 years ago today in 1921. It's interesting because the community and the nation as a whole was just climbing out of a very bad post-war recession. And the roaring 20s had yet to begin to roar, but the economy was clearing up. Cleveland was looking really good. The president at that time was Warren G. Harding, the last Ohioan to hold the presidency. Cleveland was the 5th largest city in the United States. And important for our conversation tonight, the value of its industrial production was also 5th highest in the United States. So this was an industrial city of nearly 800,000 people. 2/3 of the population was of foreign birth or foreign parentage. Another 35,000 people were immigrants, migrants from the South. So the great migration from the South was beginning to reach Cleveland. What the city would face in the 1920s was nothing seemingly bad. It was a roaring economy, the construction of the terminal, construction of major buildings downtown, shaping the entire infrastructure of the city. But one of the things that did affect it, and because I'm a historian of immigration and migration, I always focus on this, and that in 1921, the United States passed something called an emergency quota law, which very much restricted the immigration of people coming over from Europe, and particularly people from Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe. So that demographic change that was ongoing in Cleveland was beginning to close down. And in 1924, the Quota Act was made formal. And that forever changed the demographics of Cleveland. I'd like to say that if my Slovenian and Polish ancestors had waited longer to come here, I would not be speaking to you tonight. So that's really a background of a city that was really going to roar, at least until the 1929 market crash. But that's for another lecture 8 years from now. Please come back. Our first inductee is the Academy of Medicine of Cleveland and Northern Ohio. And that really sets the tone for many of my remarks tonight, because so much of what we're dealing with are organizations that deal with healthcare and medicine. And that's a natural outcome, if you will, of the economy of Cleveland and the people who had the ability to support these institutions. But if we're looking at the Academy of Medicine in Cleveland and Northern Ohio, it is extremely old. Dr. David Long was the first doctor to come to Cleveland. He arrived in 1810. Believe it or not, the population of Cleveland in 1820 was 606. Then there were medical colleges established. One was in Willoughby, Ohio, named after the man who established the college. And that would eventually merge into something called the Medical School of Western Reserve College, Western Reserve College being in Hudson, but the medical school in the late 1840s and 1850s was in Cleveland. So there is a history of medicine that goes right back to the beginning of our community. The Academy of Medicine's origins date back to 1824, and it was an organization to bring practitioners together, but I would argue that in more recent years, the Academy of Medicine has been the community's main connection to the medical profession because it has done so much to bring good medical knowledge and assistance to the general community. George Kreil, who we'll mention in a few minutes when we get to the Cleveland Clinic, was one of its first presidents. If we want to look at the things that the Academy of Medicine has done over the years, let's talk about polio vaccinations. And we can talk about vaccinations in great depth tonight, can't we? The polio epidemic was one of the most difficult to deal with in the United States, but with the Salk vaccine, it began to be handled. And what the Academy of Medicine did was oversaw in the 1950s the vaccination of 1.5 million people in northeastern Ohio. 325,000 of them were school-age children. Now, some of us are old enough to remember the vaccines, the ones on the sugar cube and the ones with the shot. I won't reveal my age, that's a secret. The Academy of Medicine then goes into new media. It offers a TV program called Prescription for Living. So it's really reaching out from the mysteries of medicine to the broader community. Now that TV program is long gone. The Academy now runs an e-based newsletter called the Northern Ohio Physician. So it's gone digital. It created a poison control line, and it worked with the American Red Cross to create a blood bank in Cleveland. It is now working seriously to educate the public about COVID and the need for vaccination. So this is an old organization that really has come to serve the community in many ways, to make it aware of health needs, to make it aware of everything that needs to be done to stay safe in difficult times, such as the time during polio, and such as the time we are in today. All history is not old. It is very current. And so I'm pleased to invite Dr. Kristen Eglund, the president of the board of directors of the Academy of Medicine, to come up to the podium, and it's at stage right. We have one set of steps here, and I will meet you, and we will have the plaque. And this goes from Tinker to Evers to Chance, if you will. I have more water here. I can drink myself silly. I will try not to do so. Let me start with a personal story here. Many years ago, my wife and I decided to take our first vacation abroad. We ended up signing up with the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago to go to a trip to Egypt, one of the passions we both had as youth. So we got to Egypt, and our tour guides in Cairo did the usual thing that you do in Cairo. They took us to rug shops and souvenir shops and whatever else. And we walked into one souvenir shop, and I still can remember the man. His English was nearly perfect, and he said, "Where are you from?" And my thought was, he's never going to know where Cleveland is. So I said, "Cleveland, Ohio." He said, "Oh, I know Cleveland, Ohio." And I said, "Why? How?" He said, "Because I had a heart transplant there, a heart surgery in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Cleveland Clinic." So what we are looking at today is one of the icons of our community, known globally, recognized widely. I also had the chance, I've spent some time in Turkey teaching. There was a Turkish politician in Cleveland. I was asked to go meet him, and guess where I met him? At the hotel at the Cleveland Clinic. Now that's a story that really has its origins in World War I. George Cryle, William Lauer, Frank Butts, I think John Phillips was not in the war, but 3 of them were in the war as physicians, and Cryle had been with Lakeside Hospital. And what they discovered there is war changes medicine. It looks for improvements to save lives, and it also brings up new ways of dealing with health care. And so when Cryle came back, he, Lauer, Bunce, and Phillips decided to basically mimic what they knew at the Mayo Clinic and to go into group practice in medicine. And that is where teams of doctors treat people, where they're renewed annually. It was an experiment in medicine, which we know today has grown marvelously. But its growth and transformation, it opened on February 26, 1921, at the building at 93rd and on Euclid. And essentially, that change we see along Euclid Avenue would happen more slowly. Not always easy for the Cleveland Clinic. Not always easy for any of the organizations that we will induct today. I think, as Peter said, surviving through 100 years or 140 years is difficult. You have to be nimble, you have to be quick. And with the Cleveland Clinic, there was a disaster at the clinic in May 1929. It got over that disaster. And it prospered again, began to employ incredible physicians. And what we see today is really a long evolution that has really come to the fore. Today, the Cleveland Clinic is the city's largest employer. It's ranked by Newsweek as the second best hospital in the world. It truly is a symbol of this city. Ask my salesperson in Egypt. It has branches in Ohio, Florida, Nevada, Toronto, Abu Dhabi, and London. So where does the name of our city appear on signboards all across the world? There are 70,000 caregivers whose mission working for the clinic is caring for life, researching for health, and educating those who serve. We're very, very proud and very pleased to induct the Cleveland Clinic into the 100-Year Club of Cleveland. And Paul Mattson, the Chief Marketing Officer, if you'll please step forward. Well, I have just had several appointments at the Cleveland Hearing and Speech Center. It's called biological entropy. The center's origins are hard to pin down. I was talking with our CFO, Hillary Beatrice, who was CFO at the Hearing and Speech Center prior to coming here. He was there for 18 years. And we know that it was begun by Helen Newell Garfield. Garfield's a name is familiar with you, right? She was the daughter of President James A. Garfield. She'd lost her hearing as a child and learned sign language. So she started to teach other people sign language so they could sense what was going on around them at that time. So it was originally christened the Cleveland Association for the Hard of Hearing, and formally in 1924. And then eventually it became the Cleveland Hearing Center, and then it began to work not only with older people, but with deaf and hard of hearing children. So again, we're talking about medicine, health care, and care of the community. It affiliated with Western Reserve University's Speech Clinic in 1945. Now, the other half of me works at CWRU. And for many years, there's a house on campus called the Garfield House. And it was the primary training site. It still is the primary training site for CWRU's Department of Communication Sciences. The Garfield House was turned over to a new facility on campus in 1967, and then the center branched out, initially to branches in South Euclid, Lorraine, and Broadview Heights. So as the community spread and grew, its services spread and grew. And we know that with many of our healthcare institutions. And by the 1950s and 1960s, lo and behold, technology had provided new ways of hearing called hearing aids. And the first ones were bulky, the new ones are wonderful, and they're quite small. So we're there, but one of the things that I see about it being on campus and being in University Circle is that in 2009, the Hearing and Speech Center successfully raised the money to build an entirely new structure on Euclid Avenue, just to the east of the main campus. And part of that incredible uptown project that just transformed University Circle. So it is a part of a growing section of Cleveland, and it is also an agency that continues to work with people from all walks of life to work with speech pathology and to give them assistance with better hearing. I would say one thing off the side, that one of our former mayors of Cleveland was in the speech department at CWRU, or Western Reserve University. Anybody want to guess who? Dennis Kucinich. I knew that would get not too warm. So we have the brand new building in Uptown, and I'm going to invite Dr. Janelle Vick, the executive director, to come up to receive the plaque for Cleveland Hearing and Speech. Oh, gosh. We now have an organization that shares common origins with this institution, the Western Reserve Historical Society. And in a sense, the origins of these two institutions and other organizations in Cleveland go back to something called the Ark. Not Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the Ark. The home of the two Case children, the sons of Leonard Case Sr., Leonard Jr., and William Case. Basically a small structure near Public Square in the 1830s where young men gathered to smoke cigars, play chess, play whist, but also to collect and talk about science, natural science, astronomy, and to talk about history. The site was christened the Ark because they had so many stuffed animals along the sides of it. And that, in a sense, is the origin of what is now the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. The Ark itself lasted, I think, until the 1870s, but it lives on now. The Cleveland Museum of Natural History was formally incorporated in December 1920. And interestingly, its building has some resonance, its first building has some resonance with this institution as well. It was housed in the old Leonard C. Hanna Mansion on Euclid Avenue. That was one of the only McKim, Mead, and White buildings in Cleveland. And with the creation of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, it began to grow there at that mansion on Euclid Avenue. The mansion is no longer there because in the 1950s, the Interbelt Freeway was driven through. Where did they go? Well, the museum moved to Wade Park, University Circle. Interestingly, it occupies a site that was once part of Cleveland's first zoo, the zoo started by Jephthah Homer Wade. Very interesting thing. And the other thing that I find interesting is that what did the Hannas do when they left that mansion in 1920? Coralie Hanna left because her husband had died, and she and her son Leonard Hanna Jr. came here and they bought the house that forms our Hanna Mansion, the Bingham Hanna House. And so Leonard Hanna Jr. is part of this. But today, when we look at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, it's a fabulous place. Many people always think of it as Steggy and dinosaurs, and that's where a lot of our children and grandchildren go, or they're dying to go there. They want to go there, but it's much, much more than that. It's particularly given the new construction that's going on there. It has an observatory with a 10.5-inch refracting telescope that used to be on the old physics building at Case Western Reserve University. More to that, it has the Shaffron Planetarium. Let's go beyond that. It has one of the earliest humanid skeletons known of Lucy. It deals with origins, it deals with environment and ecology. It has over 5 million objects in its collections. And his staff often publishes articles in vetted scholarly journals. Now, I have to say something about storage. I had a group of students once. We did a tour of Cleveland Museum of Natural History. We were taken down to the cold storage room, and it was walking into lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. It was just an incredible place to be in. But it is an academic institution that performs an academic museum. It's hard to pin down. I think what's really appropriate now is the pachyderm molding from the Cleveland Zoo is back on that site just around the, so it reflects on the origins of that site. I might say that I do some work on Native Americans in Cleveland, and my go-to source is Brian Redman, who is a CWRU professor who also works at CMNH. So it's really super. I think today it is a core institution of university. It certainly is, and close to all the other institutions here, helping really cement this area. This includes CWRU and WRHS, whose origins date back to that arc. It's a wonderful story. Sonia Winter, the president and CEO of Cleveland Museum of Natural History, please come forward so we can give you your award. Well, this is a story that is interesting. The history of banking in northeastern Ohio is not fully the stories we know it today of large banks with multiple branches, nationally owned. It's a story of savings and loans and banks that were started in neighborhoods in Cleveland, in Lorain, and Elyria, usually started by immigrant or ethnic groups, basically a place where people could park their money safely and where they could get loans. And it's really one of these things. If you look at savings and loans and banks in Cleveland, I can name a few. Quincy Savings and Loan for the African American community, Warsaw Savings and Loan, guess what, Polish, and Pioneer Savings and Loan for, I believe, the Romanian community. And so what we're looking at here is what was the Lake Erie Savings and Loan Company, what it did. It was incorporated in 1921 in Lorain, of course. Its president was P.J. Stelmaszewski. Now, only I can say that. And its vice president was a man named W.A. Stencil. It took until 1928 to hire its first full-time employee, a man named Edward Broski, who served as both an assistant secretary and its only teller. Now, the bank would come into a period of time that was extremely difficult for banks and other similar institutions, the Great Depression. The fact that it made it through the Great Depression is a symbol of persistence, wisdom, and good work. That is a difficult time for fiscal institutions. It changes its first federal savings of Lorain in 1938 with a post-Depression federal charter. So the federal government is trying to get banks back on their feet, and this one survives. It burgeons after World War II with changes in the economy, the GI Bill, suburban growth, the pursuit of the American dream, owning a home. Today, this bank has 7 branches in northeastern Ohio and 100 employees. And its current president, the 8th, is the grandson of Edward Broski. Its mission was and remains providing homeownership opportunities and a safe harbor for our customers' life savings. Now, before I call Michael Broski up to receive the plaque, I have to tell you another personal story. My family never believed in loans, it believed in paying cash. So in 1965, my father pulled $5,000 out of the bank and bought his first home. And that's the way it was done. But that bank was in the Polish neighborhood as well. So Mr. Broski, please come forward. It'd be a delight to meet you. Here you are. Yes, absolutely. You got it. Oh, we got to get it. It's known as the Polish Bank for years. You can see the simpatico here. The Harvard Business School Club of Northeastern Ohio is the oldest HBSC alumni organization in the world. Its place in Cleveland, wait for a while, echoes a part of the city's history. Now, if you're a Yale alum, like Moses Cleveland was, you're going to be a little jealous with this history. Samuel Mather, who some of you may know, was an iron ore magnate descended from the Mathers of New England. He was going to go to Harvard, which was the school for the family, but working in his father's mine at that point, he had an accident, never really went to Harvard, but he dearly loved the school. And so when he built his mansion on Euclid Avenue, you probably know it as part of CSU now, the bricks in that mansion were basically molded on the model of those in the Harvard yard. Now that's loyalty, if you will. So Harvard has a place in a city that is sometimes called Yaletown, and a very important place. The HBSC runs conferences, workshops, 18 to 20 events per year. They bring entrepreneurial experts to Cleveland from Harvard and from around the world. More importantly, it has an endowment that allows it to support local business education with scholarships and workforce development initiatives. It's sort of like our entrepreneurship program here at WRHS, that they're really beginning to leverage entrepreneurship in Greater Cleveland. So this is one of the organizations that fits so well. Now, even though Sam Mather missed Harvard, I think he would be delighted if he could be here tonight to see what the HBSC has done for the city and to see them honored with induction to the 100-Year Club of Cleveland. Krishna Nukula, please come forward and we will give you the plaque. Krishna is the president of the club. Well, we're going to deal with another health system, one that has a long history, 184 years. It began really with an infirmary established during the cholera epidemic, after the cholera epidemic of 1832, which that epidemic really hit Cleveland quite hard. It was a small city and it came in by ship. And that caused the community, we're not yet a city, to appoint a board of health, which led to the establishment of what would become the city hospital. And the city hospital eventually went out to the west side of Cleveland, at a site it still occupies today. What Metro Health is truly a hospital for all people. Not that every hospital isn't, but it started out helping people who couldn't afford help. It was the city taking care of people. It remains an institution that serves a broad spectrum of our community, including those on Medicare, Medicaid, and those who are uninsured. It was also, to reference an earlier inductee, profile a center for the fight against polio, two healthcare institutions looking at an early problem in the community. It also has developed a national burn care unit. It's nationally recognized, the finest you can find. And it organized the first life flight in Cleveland. And today we see hospital helicopters across the sky constantly. Believe me, I live on Overlook Road right at the edge, and they're about 50 feet above the house when they go over. But I'm not complaining. I may need them someday. Today, it operates over 20 health centers and 40 additional sites in Northeast Ohio. And importantly, it is totally changing its main campus with a new 11th floor Blick Center and the creation of a park-like setting along East-West 25th Street that's going to really open the area up and help the people who live there, many of whom are Hispanic, celebrate their own heritage so it becomes part of the community. I think what's happening at Metro Health, this old institution, really represents a true holistic approach to health in our community. It's amazing how medicine thrives in the city, isn't it? And what a role it plays, whether it's the clinic, whether it's the academy, whether it's Metro Health. Joe Froelich, the Senior Vice President for Communications and Community and Government Relations. Please come forward, Joe. Well, if you want to know just how famous Cleveland has gotten, let's look at the history of our next inductees. After I have a drink. The Print Club of Cleveland was founded by Ralph King in December 1919. It is the oldest affiliate group of the Cleveland Museum of Art. Its early members included Leonard Hanna Jr., William G. Mather, and Salmon P. Halley. Their backing and the backing of other members of the club in the early years is the really evidence of the importance of community participation, donor participation in an institution like the Cleveland Museum of Art. Its mission is to stimulate interest in and appreciation of old and contemporary prints, to encourage private collecting of prints by individuals, and to support by purchase and other appropriate means the prints collections at CMA. Now, interestingly, the Print Club actually predates the establishment of the Department of Prints and Drawings at the CMA. That came about in 1922, so I think we have a little bit of an impetus growing from the community to develop that aspect. Its impact at the museum has been enormous. About 1/3 of the museum's 20,000 prints and drawings were donated by or purchased for the museum by the club's members. That's benevolence and forethought on a major scale. Over the years, the club itself has changed, as has the museum world in Cleveland. Once comprised of local members, its membership, which is limited to 250, is now national. And that national membership, I think, is testimony to its reputation and the reputation of the Cleveland Museum Art across the country. And that's where Cleveland really shines when it gets national attention. I'm delighted to invite Dean Trilling, the president, to come up and receive the plaque. This is the 100-year Club of the Western Reserve, so we do go outside of Cleveland as we did in Lorraine. We're going to go to Akron now, and we're going to be talking about Summit Metro Parks. It's interesting to note that between 1910 and 1920, Akron was the fastest growing city in the United States. The figures are absolutely staggering. It's due to the war, the rubber industry, the automotive industry. It was Rubber City. What is now Summit Metro Parks was founded on December 31st, 1921. Its mission is to conserve, sustainably manage, and value natural resources for the health and enjoyment of our community, and inspire people to connect with nature through clean and safe parks. It was led, one of its founders was F.A. Seiberling of Goodyear Tire and Rubber. And when it was started, it was titled the Akron Metropolitan District. And in a way, it links to, and I'll talk about this a little bit, mimics, if you will, the Cleveland Metro Parks. They both occurred about the same time, the Cleveland Metro Parks being established here a little bit earlier. They are the two largest park systems in Ohio. And what they try to do is, both of these systems, but I think particularly, Akron, to ensure that a growing city like Akron or Cleveland in the 1910s would not overwhelm its natural environment. Development versus nature, you can see this happening in Boston with the Emerald Necklace in Boston. You can see it happening earlier when New York sets aside Central Park. So these two systems in Ohio are descendants in part of that movement. It began its land acquisition, interestingly enough, with the donation of land by an Akron farmer who donated land. Today, the parks encompass 14,000 acres in 16 parks, 3 nature centers, 150 miles of trail, and there's a yearly walk along those trails, and 22 miles of that trail are along the towpath trail on the Ohio and Erie Canal. What intrigues me is the fact that these two major metro park systems are now linked by the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, with our own Hale Farm and Village in the middle, or slightly to the south. And that leads me to wonder how these local civic initiatives, in the long term, perhaps created the impetus to create what is now a wonderful national park that links Cleveland with Akron, which has saved really the beauty of one of our greatest landmarks, the Cuyahoga Valley. So it's foresight, it's leadership, and it's a belief in the importance of nature and the outdoors that drives the Summit Metro Parks. I'd like to invite Lindsay Smith, the brand manager of the parks, to come up for their plaque. Our next inductee is Thompson Hine. It is one of the most prestigious law firms in our area. And its founding really reflects the needs of a growing industrial community in the late 1800s. And that's when you see law really growing in Cleveland and northeastern Ohio. As industry and business grow, they need legal advice. The law firms grow around that. It was founded by Amos T. Burt Thompson. Interestingly, he was a self-taught attorney, and he founded the predecessor in 1893. It was located in the Society for Savings building on Public Square, and guess what was right next door to it in Public Square, at least until 1898? The first home of the Western Reserve Historical Society. So I think we share somewhat of an origin story with Thompson Hine. It specialized in bankruptcy. And this is a natural adjunct to expansion. Again, we talk about the risk in starting businesses or any kind of enterprise. And bankruptcy is something that occurs again and again. And bankruptcy law grows in northeastern Ohio. The Historical Society, with the Court of Bankruptcy, published a history of bankruptcy law in in Greater Cleveland. So this is what they did. And in 1907, Charles P. Hine joins Thompson, and he's come different than Thompson. Thompson, a self-taught attorney, is now joined by a legal scholar who publishes numerous articles in journals. And then in 1911, they're joined by Walter L. Flory, and that marks the official birth date of Thompson Hine, 1911. And Flory lends a strong sense of civic engagement to the firm. He helps found the City Club of Cleveland, and in 1912, and then later the Cleveland Playhouse. So you begin to see this firm reaching out and working in the community. Today, Thompson Hine, the name was shortened in 2001, reflects the best in the practice of law, but also, and importantly, the concept of giving back to the community. It is led by Deborah Z. Reed, who became the managing partner in 2012. She is the first woman to lead a major Cleveland-based law firm. Its practice today is earmarked by a drive for efficient, predictable, and transparent legal services to its clients. For me, this evolution from a self-taught attorney to a cutting-edge, diverse, equitable law firm is evidence of a fascinating and important story, one that shows the potential exhibited by many of the inductees in the 100-Year Club, that they change over time, but they never forget their origins. Change over time is what makes history move. And if there were no change over time, there'd be no history, and I would be dead out of a job. I'd like to invite Kip Bolin, Cleveland office partner in charge, to come forward. Kip? You know, Cleveland's early origins and the Western Reserve's early origins were substantially Protestant. And as a Catholic, I have no issue with that. Mostly Presbyterian and Congregationalist. My wife is Congregationalist. Can I do another personal story? We're running out of time. The personal story is that when we were married in Cuyahoga Falls at Pilgrim Church, I was a bit nervous, and the only time I broke into a smile is when her side of the congregation ended the Lord's Prayer one way, and my side of the congregation ended it a different way. That being said, by the late 1840s, Cleveland was Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish. As the city grew, it drew immigrants from around the world. And the Catholic population was growing rapidly, and in 1847, Amadeus Rapp, who was French, became the first Catholic bishop of Cleveland, and the diocese was established at that point. And one of the things he wanted to ensure was that Catholic children in the community had a good Catholic education. He'd served as a chaplain to the Ursuline nuns of Boulogne-sur-Mer and asked for teachers to be sent. 4 came along with an English laywoman, and in 1850 they opened an academy with 300 students. Now let's fast forward to 1871 when Mother Mary of the Annunciation Beaumont, another name there that you'll recognize, the first superior of the group, established the first Catholic college for women that would focus on a liberal arts education. That is Ursuline College. Ursuline College has an interesting history in terms of its localities. It started out at Euclid and East 4th Street. Try to picture that. It moved to 55th and Scoville. And from 55th and Scoville, it then moved up the hill to Overlook Road, right where the new construction is going on, and all the great mansions used to be. And then, since in 1966, it moved into a custom-designed campus designed by Peter Van Dyke, noted architect, in Pepper Pike, and that's where it is today. Today, it enrolls thousands of students. Its primary course of interest is nursing, and that gets into the role of Catholic religious in nursing. Another personal story, I have a doctoral student I'm supervising, and she is writing a history of Catholic nurses in the American Civil War. So we're looking at nurses. And there are 20 other majors in liberal arts that are there, including, I would say, a very good set of public history classes that at one time were taught by the late Ted Sandy, who was a director of the Historical Society, and also Barry Euler-Stith, who was one of our archival processors here. Their student athletes perform in Division II, NCAA. Now, I think that Mother Mary would be pleased to see the young women of Ursuline participating in sport at this time. It has maintained over the years, though importantly, its focus on Catholic social teaching with an emphasis on the dignity of the human person. That's very important nowadays, isn't it? An emphasis on the dignity of the human person. As we look at change in the world, as we look at refugees, everything going around with us. I'd like to invite Sister Christine, I think it's Divini, if I have it right, up to the podium for presentation of the plaque. Okay, I'm having another glass of water, but I think it's time for a smoothie. Because we're going to talk about our last inductee, the Vitamix Corporation. And its history is truly fascinating. Shows the evolution of product innovation, long-term family ownership, and importantly, another link to health and wellness. What is now the Vitamix Corporation started in 1921 with a can opener sold by the Barnard Sales Company, which had been started by William Papa Barnard. His wife, Ruth, and their son, William G. Bill Barnard, joined the business in the mid-1930s, and they promoted their wares beyond the can opener at the Great Lakes Exposition in Cleveland in 1936, 1937. You can see pictures of that all around this rotunda. By that time, the focus, thanks to Papa, was on products for a healthy lifestyle. Now, they were following a long trend in American history, going from Sylvester Graham's graham cracker to Bernard McFadden's focus on healthy living. We've always looked for ways to remain healthy, sometimes more so than before. Papa then invented a blender that would allow individuals to incorporate good, whole foods into their diet, getting them away from the cans and things on the grocery shelf. By 1948, Vitamix products were it's very interesting. They're taking advantage of a relatively new media to advertise the product. It's called television. It was on channel WEWS. Now, as some of you remember television in healthcare and health products, you probably remember Jack LaLanne, which is a competing company, if you will. The company was incorporated in 1955. Bill and Ruth had 6 children who would carry on the business. William Grover Barnard joined the company in 1962. He became president and CEO. President and CEO from a company that was one person selling products. And they changed the name to Vitamix Corporation. It was a company that was way ahead of the curve. Fast forward to today. Today, when my young friends and students are all looking for smoothies and healthy mixes and drinks, you're finding new stores along Euclid Avenue that purvey those things. But let's fast forward again beyond that. Jody Berg, the daughter of John Barnard, the CEO in 1999, is now CEO. Right now, the company that started with the sale of a can opener is global. It employs more than 900 people, sells in over 130 countries, and holds over 833 patents. That is the best, forgive me, blend of entrepreneurship I can find. Dr. Berg, will you please come forward to accept your plaque? Well, this wraps up this year's presentations, but not the program. It's my pleasure now to introduce Glenn Anderson, our Senior Vice President for Advancement, to come up to the podium and to take over the reins of the show, so to speak.
Thank you, John. Good evening. My name is Glenn Anderson, and I am the Senior Vice President of Advancement here at the Western Reserve Historical Society. And I am pleased to introduce our featured speaker for this evening, Carrie Jaros, President and Chief Executive Officer of Gojo Industries. When I first thought that Carrie would be an ideal speaker for this year's 100-Year Club inductee ceremony, due in part to the crucial role that Gojo has played globally over the past 2 years, I only had one stumbling block. I didn't know her. However, I did know her parents, Susan and Stan, who are here this evening. Perhaps they could team me up? Well, after weighing the potential awkwardness of the situation, I in fact did just that. I reached out to her father and my good friend Stan Jaros, who graciously said, "Why don't you send me some information that I can forward on to Carrie, and I'm sure she would be happy to accept if she can." Well, Carrie said yes, and we are very pleased that she did. Carrie has led Gojo Industries as President and Chief Executive Officer since January 2020 and has been with the company since 2014. But her connection to Northeast Ohio goes back generations. Her daughters mark the 7th generation of her family that has lived on the east side of Cleveland, descendants of a Bohemian brewmeister, well, that's a tongue twister, who settled in Geauga County a couple hundred years ago. Carrie earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Policy from Brown University and an MBA from Harvard Business School, obviously an inductee this year. She then spent the first 12 years of her career as a management consultant for Bain & Company before moving back to Northeast Ohio to join Dealer Tire, by the way, a 2018 100-Year Club inductee. Here she held several roles, eventually overseeing half of the company's revenues. In 2014, Carrie was named president of Walnut Ridge Strategic Management Company, where she began her relationship with Gojo as a board director. In 2016, Carrie joined Gojo full-time to lead innovation, marketing, and enterprise strategy, and shortly thereafter was promoted to Chief Operating Officer before being named President and CEO. Additionally, Carrie serves as an independent director of publicly traded grocery outlet and of Stowe-based ESOP ACRT Services, and she is an advisory board member of the startup AntFlow. She is vice chair of the Board of Trustees of Laurel School, a trustee of the Calvin and Eleanor Smith Foundation, a board member of the Akron Children's Hospital Foundation, and of the Boys and Girls Club of Ohio. Carrie and her husband Brett reside in Shaker Heights with their 3 daughters. Welcome, Carrie, as our keynote speaker for the 2021 100-Year Club induction ceremony.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I am so happy to be here tonight. My first request is if you have not yet pulled your chocolate bomb forward, push your dinner out of the way, pull it forward, get a cup of coffee, and I will do my best to supplement the chocolate bomb with some good storytelling. So it is just an absolute joy to be up here tonight. You good? Okay. Is one of these? I'm going to grab one. Not that one? You don't feel good about that one? Okay, I'm gonna go with this one. Okay. All right, it is such a joy to be up here tonight. I will tell you, as I was preparing for this talk, I was feeling a tremendous amount of guilt as a lifelong Clevelander that I did not have a sufficient number of Cleveland facts in my talk, and John has totally absolved me of that problem. So I feel like we're full up on Cleveland facts. I'm gonna stick to Gojo and Purell tonight. And if we have any questions for him on the history, we'll hit him up afterwards. So I want to do a couple things before I get going. First of all, I want to celebrate the Youth Entrepreneur Education Program. It sounds like just a tremendous program. And as Kelly shared, it helps support students in grades 3 through 7 in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District and other districts around Northeast Ohio who are learning about the history of innovation. That is so critical because it's planting seeds that might grow into these 100-year companies 100 years from today. So I'm thrilled to be supporting YEE. I'm going to talk a little bit about Northeast Ohio as a place to really start, scale, and then sustain businesses over generations. In 2021, there were 13 Northeast Ohio companies among the Fortune 500, and 11 of those were more than 100 years old. And that's actually twice as many as our fair share given our population in Northeast Ohio. So this is not only a great place to sustain businesses, it was a really, really great place to start them 100 years ago. And we're giving rise to dramatically more new businesses now than we even were 5 years ago. So, we talk sometimes about maybe having been a really good place to start businesses a long time ago and maybe not as good today. That's changing, and it's changing because of the hard work of many of the people in this room, but also some other things I'll talk about. So we actually, as a state of Ohio, will start over 200,000 new businesses this year. It's remarkable to think about, 200,000 new businesses starting up in the state of Ohio. And Cleveland is one of the top 10 US cities for population growth in college-educated millennial residents. And we had a 76% increase in residents 25 to 34 since the year 2000. So lots of young people choosing to come here. I think the cost of living gives us a huge advantage. It helps young families settle here. It helps one person maybe stay home and care for kids while the other one is doing things that are entrepreneurial or trying to really build a career. That's something that we've done as a family, and we couldn't have done it in Boston, where we were before we moved home. I also think our supply of fine attorneys, including the two who gave birth to me, as well as many accountants and bankers, including our friends from PNC who are here tonight and take great care of us, make a big difference in this town. And we have more of them per capita than anybody else does, those professional service folks. And they're here because of our legacy, but that means that they provide support for us as an incredible infrastructure as businesses continue to start and scale and sustain here. So what I'm going to argue tonight is that those factors are really important, and I'm really glad they're here. They're necessary for this ecosystem to thrive, but they're not sufficient. What actually is the key ingredient, I think, that has helped the folks we heard about tonight who have been here for 100 or 150 years, or Gojo, who's celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, what's helped us get where we are, I think is really comes down to entrepreneurial mindset. It probably seems obvious that being entrepreneurial is important to start a business. I think we talk about that all the time. But it might not crack the top 10 things people talk about when they're talking about scaling or sustaining a business. We don't often talk about that entrepreneurial mindset being so critical after that initial period. In fact, I spoke at an event about entrepreneurship a few months ago, and I was the keynote, and I said at the beginning, I admit that it might be a little bit strange that I'm talking about this, because I work for a 75-year-old soap company. So you were probably thinking you'd get like some cool, startup CEO. I've never started a business. But raise your hand in this room if you've ever participated in developing a strategic plan for an organization. Okay, keep it up if that organization wasn't a startup. Okay, so keep it up. Had been around for some time. And now leave your hand up as part of that strategy development process included looking at what was changing in the external environment, in the needs or wants of customers or other constituents, maybe changes to behavior of competitors, availability of substitutes, all those things. So you can put it down. So those are organizations that have probably been around for lots and lots of years, right? And the things that are needed to figure out how to take them forward, what to do to get to that 5-year out or 10-year out exciting next milestone, are exactly the same things we need to start businesses. And we tend to forget about them over time because we get into this complex strategic planning process and we're worried about Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides. But it's actually exactly the same stuff. Without a doubt, one of the things that has led to Gojo's success over the last 75 years, and what we could find in any of these organizations, is that continuing to maintain that entrepreneurial mindset that leads to innovation, that helps you protect and extend competitive advantages, but evolve to make them relevant in a changing marketplace. So I'll spend the rest of our time together talking about what that entrepreneurial mindset means to me and why it's been so important to Gojo. Not only over the last 75 years, but I promise I'll talk a little bit about the last 20 months, because I think that's probably what you're most interested in. So I think if we can leave here, and I'll come back to this at the end, really thinking about the organizations we touch on a day-to-day basis, whether it's because we're executives, whether it's because we're board members. A lot of people in this room actually have a lot of impact on the organizations in our town, and we can just talk a little bit with those organizations about entrepreneurial mindset and about some of the other things I'm going to bring up tonight. I actually think it'll make a difference. We're so lucky to live in a place where a room like this can leave and start conversations and actually change things in our city. Okay. So what do I mean by entrepreneurial mindset? So if you scan the literature around attitudes and behaviors of successful entrepreneurs, what I'll call entrepreneurial mindset, pretty consistently you find a couple of things. You find a passion for solving problems, sometimes an obsession with solving problems, being unwilling to accept them as they are, but instead seeing them as opportunities. You find grit and resilience, what grit author Angela Duckworth would call being undeterred in the face of obstacles and bouncing back from failure. And number 3, which is my favorite, is learning agility. So learning from experience and applying it in new ways. The Center for Creative Leadership, who we've used at Gojo over time, says it's about knowing what to do when you don't know what to do, which is all about looking at other experiences you have. So let me sprinkle in some research on why these things matter and some stories from some companies I know, especially Gojo. So first, a passion for solving problems. So in 2013, I had the opportunity to meet Yuri Levine, who is the founder of the famous driving app Waze, which some of us may have even used to get here tonight if we didn't have the benefit of living here for 7 generations. Yeah. So he had just sold the business for $1.2 billion to Google when I met him at this event. I was working for the family office at Gojo, and I was at some private family office event, and I was sort of awkwardly standing in a corner, and this guy started talking to me, and it was Yuri Levine. So he had just sold Waze. So I asked him what advice he had for me. And he said his most important piece of advice that he gives anyone who asks that question is fall in love with the problem, not your solution. So at Waze, they were obsessed with the fact that all the mapping and GPS apps that were out there at the time couldn't really get you to your destination on time. So they said, I've got this great thing, but it's really just a digital version of something I had anyway, a map, and it doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is that accidents or pop-up construction or traffic jams derail my trip. And so they ideated around that specific problem, and they figured out that the best information about the route that's directly in front of you comes from the people who it's directly behind. So literally other drivers who have just gone through the route. And so they figured out how to get those people to serve up the data. They created this community-powered app where everybody would help each other. And they built a $1.2 billion company at the time very quickly. I think it took them 7 years, and 7 years seems to turn up a lot in entrepreneurial stories. You'll hear it like 3 more times from me tonight. Maybe people just use it conveniently because it sounds shorter than 10 but longer than 5. So this solution was so powerful that he sold it back then, but think of all of the companies, those tech companies that have been bought. Very few of them actually endure. They sort of go away, the tech gets stolen. So Waze is still a part of our lives today. It was an incredible solution. All right, next. So one of my all-time favorite strategy thinkers, a Harvard Business School professor, of course, Clay Christensen, may have given us, I think, the best tool yet for solving problems. He taught us that customers are not loyal to brands or to companies. They're actually loyal to getting a job done. His jobs theory holds that the most important step we can take when we're innovating is actually to interview people about the jobs that they need done, and to ask them what they're using to do those jobs now, what their circumstance of struggle is, where are they suffering in not having those jobs well. And that data is the data that then you can use to figure out how to create your own solution, which they will hire to do the job better. Jessica McCoy is actually with us tonight. She's our Chief Solutions Officer at Gojo, and we are so obsessed with this jobs theory that Jess and her team have actually deeply embedded it in the way that we do all of our new product innovation now, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So what Clay Christensen did, he had a team of folks who worked with him, and they went out and they wanted to try out this theory. and they used McDonald's as a place to try it out. So McDonald's hired them, and they brought them in, and they said, we have had years of failed attempts at innovating our milkshakes. Our market research tells us that 30 to 45-year-old men buy these milkshakes, and we're not surprised by that. But we ask them over and over and over again how to make these milkshakes better so we can sell more of them. And they tell us some people want them thicker, some people want them thinner, they want things mixed in, they don't want things mixed in. So we try to keep tweaking these milkshakes to represent what these men tell us they want, and sales don't increase. And so Clay and his team went in, and they did deep job interviewing. So they interviewed these men for the job that these milkshakes were doing. And what they found was, even though all these men were 30 to 45 and they were buying McDonald's milkshakes, you'd think that would be a pretty tight circle. There were actually two totally different groups of people hiring these milkshakes for totally different jobs. So, this will horrify the women in the crowd. The first group of these men, and in fact, the majority of these men, were hiring this milkshake between 7 and 8 a.m. They were. They were hiring it on their commute in the morning. Now, as they were interviewed about why they hired the milkshake instead of some other things, like maybe a banana, very practical, what they said is that the milkshake was actually the perfect thing to do this job in the car. But the job wasn't just providing breakfast, nutrition. It was to entertain them on a sad, dull commute. Many of these men were driving for maybe an hour. They were sitting in traffic. They were listening to talk radio. And they had tried to maybe spread cream cheese on a bagel on their knee. They had tried to eat yogurt. There were messes. There were problems. The banana and the granola bar felt like the right thing to do, but were just so depressing in a day that was already feeling pretty bleak. And this milkshake made their day. They would stop at McDonald's close to home, get a big, maybe an extra large. It came with a thin straw. It was a thick milkshake. It took that whole hour of work, really deep work, to get that milkshake. So they loved it. It brought fun. It brought some indulgence to this long commute. In response to the job that this milkshake was doing, McDonald's realized they could actually make it better. They could make it a better performer for these guys who were hiring it. So they did things like amp up the protein. They cut a little bit of the sugar, but not enough to make it taste bad. They added morning flavors like mocha, so it would seem even a little more appropriate to drink in the car. And they provided a frequent buyer program, because these men were nothing if not conscious of their pocketbooks. So they got this frequent buyer program. They were being responsible. The 5th milkshake was free. They really felt like they were doing the right thing for their family. Sales climbed. The other group hiring the milkshake, also 30 to 45-year-old men, strangely enough, were hiring the milkshake between 3 and 6 p.m. And they preferred a very small milkshake. Strange. However, deep interviewing of these men revealed that they were actually buying the milkshake for their children, who they had the duty of entertaining from 3 to 6 p.m. until they could drop them off at an evening activity or likely with their mothers. Many of them were divorced. This was like part of the routine. We stop at McDonald's, we go to the plaything, we get the milkshake. They wanted very different features from their milkshake. They did not want the milkshake to take an hour to drink. They did not want a very thin straw and a very thick milkshake in a very large cup, because what they found is when it was time to go, it was time to go, and if that milkshake had not been finished, there were tears. The thin straw with the thick milkshake often led to the lid being removed, which also turned out to be a significant problem for these men. So they wanted it small. They wanted a wide straw that the milkshake could easily be drawn up through. They did not want mocha. They did not want protein. They wanted vanilla, chocolate, and maybe strawberry, okay? Totally different job, totally different solution needed. So there's so much to be learned from this story. They fixed the milkshake, sales soared in the afternoon, right? How many of us would have missed that and tried to innovate with pooled data about these two groups for years and years and years, like McDonald's? So one of my favorite local entrepreneurs, Scott Mueller, who we heard won this award a few years ago, told a group of us who were embroiled in a debate at Dealer Tire one day about whether strategy X or strategy Y would increase the company's value more. He said, "We need to focus on doing things that are valuable. When you do things that are valuable for other people, you create value for yourself." That's a very, very good example of that entrepreneur's mindset that focuses you first on the person or the stakeholder that you're actually there to serve, that job to be done. So the founding story at Gojo is a story about falling in love with a problem, finding a solution that did the job much better than anything that existed, and creating real value that people were willing to pay for. So Goldie and Jerry, in 1946, founded the business. They're behind me on the screen. Goldie was working in a rubber factory in Akron. She and the other women who had come into factories while men were at war did not like dipping their hands in the kerosene and benzene that the men used at the end of the day to get the carbon black and grease off. We can all think of lots of reasons why they were right? Dipping your hands in kerosene and benzene, not a great idea. But at the time they said, "It really beats my skin up and my hands look bad." Her husband Jerry, who had been a cookie salesman, said, "You're right, there's gotta be a better way," because he's someone who always loved to tinker and always looked for a solution. And so he walked the halls at Kent State University asking around for someone who might know something about creating a cleaner for hands. And fortunately, he bumped into Clarence Cook, who was a professor there at the time. And Clarence had actually spent time during the war. He was a chemist. And he had worked on how to get lanolin out of wool so that military uniforms were not suffocatingly hot. So this actually turned out to be really important because he knew how to deal with emulsification. And that was a huge part of that original cream cleaner. So he and Grandpa Jerry developed the formula, and they packaged it in cookie jars, which Jerry got from his old cookie route. So he went around and visited all the delis. There were no tin cans at the time, and they packaged the cleaner in these pickle jars and from the cookie route, and they sold them out of the back of the car. And Jerry would actually put a dab of it on his palm, and he would go into a service station and shake the guy's hand, and the guy would look at his hand, and Jerry said 9 out of 10 times, he would wipe it off and get ready to punch him in the face, and he would see that all the grease was gone off his hand. But once in a while, he would hit him first. But 9 out of 10 is not bad. So Goldie kept the books, and they sold the pickle jars out of the back of the car, and the business started to take off because it was at a time when service stations were popping up on every corner in the country. And one day, Jerry hears, this is like 6 years into the business, he hears that some customers are stopping buying. And so, what do you do when you have entrepreneurial mindset? You don't think about why, you just go out and ask people. So he literally drove out and he said to these guys, "Why are you stopping buying my product?" And what they said is, "We can't afford this stuff, Jerry. The guys, they have these big hands and they're dipping their hands in this pickle jar and they're using too much. And what I've actually found is some of them are putting it in their lunch boxes and they're taking it home so they can work on their own cars in their garage. And I am not putting up with this anymore, so we're getting rid of it." So Jerry, being someone with incredible entrepreneurial mindset, realized this was a big problem, and so he developed the first portion-controlled soap dispenser, literally the granddaddy of every soap dispenser on every wall in the world, and he patented it in 1952. Incidentally, the crank that's on this portion-controlled dispenser was actually a window crank from a car, and Joe Camphor, who was our CEO and chairman for many, many years, one of his first jobs as a child was to go to the dump and harvest cranks for the dispenser. The invention of Purell, which I promise I'll talk about, is a similar story. So it's all about a passion for solving problems. And it's really continued that way for over 30 years. And as far as I'm around, and these guys are around, we'll keep at it. Gojo developed Purell instant hand sanitizer in less than a year, starting with a problem and then marrying an old technology for antiseptic hand rubs that hospitals had kept on hand for emergencies with some new know-how from the shaving gel industry from an employee who had come from there. So the Purell story not only has problem solving, but it also has grit, resilience, and learning agility. That original customer who came to them was a food company. and fast food guy, and they said, we need something so that people can clean their hands when they're away from a sink. They do a lot of gross things back there in these fast food places, and there is not a sink everywhere. And we need to have people be able to clean their hands. So we came up with this stuff in a year, and when we were ready for it, we brought it to them, and we said, we've got it, it's amazing. Incidentally, it was originally, Joe wanted to call it Flash, and he flew to Boston to buy the rights to the name Flash, and while he was gone, we have this amazing social behavioral scientist who's been at Gojo for decades, and while he was gone, she got a team together and said, we have got to have a name before he gets back, or this thing's gonna be called Flash. And so she tells the story, she bought a bunch of pizzas and a lot of soda, she got a bunch of people together, and they used a technique that was brand new at the time, which was putting all these words up on the wall that seemed like they might have some deeper meaning related to actually the job that this hand cleaner did that was more emotional rather than just functional. And they came up with Purell, which is in many ways a combination of pure and wellness, though she'll say it's much more sophisticated than that. So anyway, they came up with this product and they went back to the food service company, and by then they had moved on, they had accepted the germs, whatever the case was, they said, we're not interested. And so for 7 years straight, we had this product, we had this solution that we knew was really special because it did something that nothing else in the world did, and it had been developed against a very logical problem, and there was no one to sell it to. So Joe actually put it in the seller's sales plan every year for 7 years. There's still one of the sellers at Gojo today who tells the story of the year when Joe said it was gonna go in their bonus for the 7th year after they had made $0 on it, and he came over the table. And fortunately, it was just long enough that their faces met in the middle. And Joe said, yeah, we're doing it again. Figure it out. It's an awesome product. And so they did. So the magic happened in 2001. There was a new job to be done for this product, which was preventing patients and healthcare workers from an infection outbreak at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And the chief infectious disease doc brought this product in. He felt like it could make a difference in this moment of this huge outbreak. And there were a lot of naysayers in the hospital because they said, if you bring this in, people are gonna stop washing their hands. And he said, I don't think so. Let's see. So he brought the product in. He put it all over the hospital. If you go in a hospital today, there are about 8 sanitizer dispensers for every soap dispenser. And the infection stopped, the outbreak stopped. And more interestingly, what they found is that hand washing went up. So having people focus on hand hygiene and get used to having clean hands actually increased hand washing at the same time. And the CDC has revised their guidance, and hand sanitizer is actually the lead indication for cleaning your hands in a hospital today unless they're visibly soiled. And that all goes back to this moment when they sort of had this, I guess, violating my own rule, they had a really good solution that was looking for a problem, but it had started with a problem, so maybe it works out. All right. So as I said, Jess and her team have really brought this concept of jobs theory into our innovation process. Some of the coolest innovations recently that have come out, I'll just pick my favorite given time. So a couple of years ago, we knew that one of the biggest jobs out there was, or one of the biggest circumstances of struggle was around changing batteries in touch-free dispensers. So if you imagine a hospital system installing thousands and thousands and thousands of touch-free dispensers, every one of those dispensers' batteries dies at a different time. Every single one. Big hospital systems literally have people whose full-time job is to walk around the hospital and look for dispensers whose batteries are dead and change them. So we knew that that was a problem. And for years, we thought about different ways that we could address that pain point and do that job. And so a couple of years ago, we launched the Purell ES8 dispenser with energy on the refill. Seems really obvious now. So what we did is we actually put the battery on the soap or sanitizer refill so that every refill brings its own power. So you never have to change the batteries in the dispenser again. Pretty cool. So great example of really interviewing around that job to be done, that circumstance of struggle, and then going and innovating against that rather than doing all kinds of other cool and fancy things that product developers can come up with. So I'll skip a few more and just talk for a few minutes about the other key element of entrepreneurial mindset, grit, resilience, and learning agility. So grit and resilience get a lot of airtime these days, and it makes sense because they're important. Being able to bounce back from failure, to press on undeterred, it's not only essential when you're starting something up or scaling it up or sustaining it, but honestly in virtually every arena of being a human. Life is full of obstacles, of toe stubs, and of spectacular flops. And none of this is really new news. Humans have been doing stupid things for a really, really long time, and recovering from them. So Napoleon Hill, whose self-help book, Think and Grow Rich, which hopefully many of you in this room have read, it was published in 1937, and it is still among the top 10 best-selling self-help books of all time. He famously said, "Individual success usually is in exact proportion to the scope of the defeat the individual has experienced and mastered. Many so-called failures represent only a temporary defeat that may prove, in fact, to be a blessing in disguise." One of our most famous failures at Gojo came back in the early 80s when that same beloved former chairman and CEO, Joe Camphor, had an industry-redefining insight. A company named Minnetonka had come out with a liquid hand soap, the very first one. And Joe had the insight that if liquid soap at the sink was a hit, the shower would be next. He built out production lines. He hired Ed McMahon as our national spokesperson. He sold the soap into retailers all over the country and prepared for the big event. And none of it sold. Body wash is now a more than $1 billion category at retail. It's bigger than hand soap. So Joe was not wrong. He was just really, really early. He also missed the loofah, or the puff, which turns out to have been the catalyst to unlock the body wash category. Who could have guessed? The headline in the Akron Beacon Journal said, "Akron Soap Company down drain." We had just gone through a refinancing with National City, now PNC. Our friends are still with us, thank God. The gentleman who had done the refinancing called him on the phone and said, "Please don't say things like that. Don't have conversations like that with the newspaper," because when they called him, Joe said, "It'll be fine, we'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. Maybe we'll go bankrupt. It'll be all right." So the banker called and said, please don't do that. But Joe didn't give up. So he and Jerry had put in all these lines. Jerry was his uncle, and they were ready to go, and they had no business. And so they went out and secured a co-packing arrangement to use the production assets and pack soap for someone else. And things continued. It was a little dark those days. They wish they had had a milkshake, but it was kind of depressing. But Joe was on a flight, on a transatlantic flight a couple years later, and the guy next to him, they chatted for the whole flight, and it turned out that guy was a distributor for soap. And he hadn't gotten a new product, which was the first soap that was in a sealed refill, a sealed cartridge for a wall-mounted dispenser. It used to be that all the soap was glug glug, pour it into the dispenser. And this guy said, "This new cartridge thing is really cool, it's cleaner, it's less messy, it's proprietary." And so Joe picked his brain on the entire flight. And the guy said, "I'm really mad because I can't get it because they're doing exclusive distribution and there's already a guy in my territory who has it." So Joe raced home after his trip and converted all of their lines to make this new cartridge soap, and went to a trade show, and he gave away trips on some cruise with girls who were dressed up like the soap refills, and sold out the trip and got 400 new distributors that day and got back in business. And he couldn't have done it if he hadn't had the lines, if he hadn't happened to be sitting next to this guy on the plane, but even more if he hadn't been somebody with entrepreneurial mindset who saw that opportunity and hit it. A couple more quotes for you. So Adam Grant, who I saw Ann Klotz post something from today, who's with us, he wrote the book Originals, How Nonconformists Move the World. And he explained this phenomenon to us perfectly. His work showed that the most successful entrepreneurs and creators don't actually have, on average, better ideas. They just have many, many more. Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, it wasn't their average that is so much better than their peers. It's that they generated sometimes 600 to 1,000 different compositions for every one of other composers of their day. A few of those are considered true masterpieces. Many are not. Edison made a doll that talked that was so creepy that it scared not only children but adults. He came up with a fruit preservation technique that failed. He tried to mine in a number of ways that didn't work out. But during that window, when he had over 100 failed ideas, he also perfected the light bulb. So the idea is that you have to generate a lot of ideas to reach greatness, And if that road to success is so certainly paved with failure, those who make it are the ones who bounce back resiliently from each stumble, who press on with grit undeterred. But they also learn from every single pitfall and increase their odds of success for next time. Being learning agile also ensures that those of us with entrepreneurial mindsets, our ideas are evolving and changing, because sometimes it takes so long to get there that the world has changed around us, and so we need to just be learning all the time. So the last thing I'll leave you with there, and then I'm going to show you a fun video of all the things we've done over the last 12 months, is that we take this concept of grit and resilience and learning agility a step further, and we actually have built in the idea of fail fast, fail cheap into everything we do at Gojo. So when I first started, one of the first things I heard was fail fast, fail cheap, and I thought, why on earth are we telling people to fail? I get why we're telling them to do it cheap, but why is that part of who we are? Don't we want to succeed? And what I heard back is, any new product development process is going to have a ton of failure. Let's front load it, and let's do it in a way that's as low risk as possible, where we can maximize the learning and minimize the risk that it's the last failure we can endure. And so we try to fail fast, fail cheap, and we even use an innovation engineering process that brings all the death threats to the front of the process, so that you hit them early on purpose. You try to bring the stuff up that's the hardest, so you don't have a bunch of successes, get all the way down the road and invest, and then have that failure at the end. All right. So I'm going to skip a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2020 and 2021, and then we'll watch a video. So the last 2 years have been really hard. If you want to hug someone before you leave, put your mask on and hug the people at the table in the middle, because they have been through, all of us have been through a lot, but boy, have these last 2 years been hard. So I became CEO on January 1st of 2020. None of us had heard of COVID. None of us had even heard of Wuhan, China probably, or very few of us unless we had been there. Within a couple of days, we were having constant conversations about what was going on in China. We were starting to talk about what that might mean, whether it would just be a moment and it would be under control, whether it might last a little bit longer, whether it might be something like Ebola, which we had been through in 2014, which never really hit the US, but still caused a surge in our sales for a period of time, whether it might look more like H1N1, which had caused a tremendous surge for us, and what we really defined as a surge at that time. We now dream bigger, but we were having lots of conversations. Within a couple more weeks, around February 10th, we had a room full of people, and we had to make the decision about whether we should turn on 100% of our production full bore. And we didn't have the orders to support that yet, but we thought they might be coming. And if you know anything about manufacturing, it's not good to get behind, okay? So we made the call, we turned everything on, and then we watched over the next couple of weeks as our orders came in 10x what they had been the day before, one night. And within several weeks, we had 3 years of back orders. 3 years of back orders. Now, in our industry, that can happen really fast because we sell through distribution. And so when you want soap and you can't get it at your restaurant or your hospital, you might call 20 distributors. And every single one of them is going to put in an order with us. So there's no way to know how much of that demand is real. There's no way to imagine how much of it might turn into consumption. And you have to serve all of it. Because if the distributor can't get it, then they're going to go put in an order somewhere else. And so we had 3 years of back orders. We realized really quickly that even with our very best surge strategy in place, we were not going to be able to get nearly to 10x. We were going to maybe be able to get to 2 or 3x if we were lucky. And so we had to start putting people on allocation. And we started with our Gojo values, which I'll talk about in a second, saying we're going to serve healthcare workers, we're going to serve emergency responders, we're going to serve the military, and we're going to serve grocery workers, because they were really on the front lines. And to do that in our systems, we basically broke SAP. So that was a very bad day. It's a very bad day for a new CEO when SAP breaks. And we actually moved allocation into Excel. So we were literally allocating product for a pretty big company across thousands and thousands of customers in Microsoft Excel. And we weren't really supposed to be together, so you'll see a picture in a minute of our war room. So we were sitting really far apart and hoping none of us had this mysterious illness and using Excel to decide who would get soap and sanitizer. It was a crazy time. Pretty quickly, we started pushing through obstacles using entrepreneurial mindset. We ended up sourcing, the first thing that happens in a business like this is you run out of components. So we started sourcing bottles and caps and pumps from anyone on the planet who would give them to us. Greg is here tonight. It was his job to figure out if they were acceptable from a quality perspective. You can imagine the pressure he was under, and he held strong. Greg and I actually had a lot of special meetings where we smelled alcohol together. Literally, when it came off of the tankers, we ran through our entire supply of ethanol for the whole year by April. And the pandemic really only started in February. So in 2 months, we blew through our entire ethanol supply for the year, and we had to source it alternately. And we have excruciatingly high standards for ethanol, which is why our sanitizer smells wonderful and is only made with good things, and other sanitizers smell terrible and sometimes have poison in them. So we literally smelled the ethanol, we made sure it was acceptable, even though it had passed all the other tests, so that the aesthetics were acceptable. And we sourced bottles like P&G allowed us to source their Dawn dish soap bottle as long as we put on it that it was from P&G. And so you can get Purell in a Dawn dish soap bottle and squeeze it out on the hands of all of your loved ones. We have found a manufacturer of isopropyl alcohol in the South, and we got them to agree to take 33 tankers a week of Purell that we made and fill it into bottles for us because we couldn't find explosion-proof lines. So it was crazy. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that entrepreneurial mindset that every single day powered us through looking at new and creative solutions. Whatever the constraint of the day was, when we solved it, there was a brand new one behind it. And we just kept going, chewing through them. And so we ended up moving fast. We ordered a lot of molds for brand new equipment so that we could supply up to 7 and 10x our normal supply, and we did that back in April and May of 2020. Many companies waited a year to realize that this was going to be enduring demand, and frankly, they still don't have molds and production lines. Ours are in and running, so we moved really fast. We more than doubled the number of facilities in Northeast Ohio. We'll show you that. We vertically integrated, so we now start literally with resin pellets and corn, and we make a bottle of Purell. So you'll see some of it here. We own an ethanol refinery now in Coshocton, Ohio. So we literally start with Ohio corn to make our own proprietary ethanol that we know is good. And we start with those resin pellets, and we blow mold and injection mold all the pieces and parts of our pumps and our bottles, including the refills that go in the dispensers. We pulled forward, all told, 10 years of CapEx and spent over $400 million in 12 months. It was a wild, wild, wild ride. Our CFO is here tonight. He still has nightmares. There were tons and tons of individual decisions, so many risks that it's a miracle that we're all still standing. But what allowed us to do it was we knew it was a portfolio of risks, and we're so used to taking them that we felt comfortable that even though there were certain failures in that portfolio, that the whole thing collectively would deliver something that would carry us through. So I'm going to play the video, and then I will wrap up. See if it works.
Let's go. It's time to go, 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 go. It's time to go, go, go. Let's go. It's time to go, 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 go. Let's go. What you waiting for? Your prayers are already answered. Do you really want it? Ain't got no time to wait. Let's go. Green light. Step on the gas. Don't let no one pass. Put some pep in your steps. Follow me this way. Red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light. Go. Do you wanna go, go, go? I'ma run this show. Do you wanna go? I got the green light. It's time to go. Woo! Let's go. Red light. It's time to go, go, go. Green light. It's time to go, go, go. Let's go. Red light. It's time to go, go, go. Green light. It's time to go. Make up your mind. Check your attitude. Make your mark. That's all you gotta do. Step on the gas. Don't let no one pass. If anyone asks you,
we were trying to decide which video to show, and I will tell you that in any other city in the country, I would have picked the marketing sizzle reel with all the cool, like, consumery stuff. And in Cleveland, Ohio, I knew what was going to get you fired up at 8:45 was a manufacturing video. And I'm so glad. All right. So, final thought for the night. So, these are our Gojo values. This is actually a screenshot of my laptop. Because I like to do things when they're really fresh, you'll see that the screenshot was taken while most of you were driving here today. It's true, from Shaker. So this is my background. It's been up the whole pandemic. I looked at these values, I kid you not, 5 times a day when we were in the thick of it. And I needed to do that because we made so many hard decisions every single day. And I needed to go back and remind myself of bold leadership, that we do things that we have the courage to do things that no one else will. I had to remind myself that we have uncompromising integrity, and so when people were screaming at me because I wouldn't send them sanitizer, I could say, don't you think that your local hospital should have it first? This helped so much. But very few companies really have the stuff that's in that last column in their values. They have a lot of the stuff that's in the first 4 columns. Companies that have the stuff that's in the last column get that it's not easy to keep taking risks. It's not easy to be bold. It's really easy the longer you're around to be less bold. And I bet if we survey the folks who came up tonight, they still do a lot of bold things in their businesses. And they can talk about a lot of the failures they've had and what they've learned. So, thank you for letting me be here with you tonight. As you leave, think about 1 or 2 people who are in your sphere of influence who you can give the confidence to have that entrepreneurial mindset and do things that are scary and hard, because it will be good for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie, for that wonderful presentation, and I want to thank everyone for being here this evening and helping support our YE programs. And congratulations again to our inductees for 2021. Thank you. Have a nice evening.